News Radio 600 Kogo, San Diego Business Saturday on the air. Great to have you along today. Boy, what interesting times we live in with respect to trade, the economy, the workplace, even Horton Plaza. Coming up today, Christina Gustin in just a moment here. We'll get this thing started. San Diego Business Saturdays on the air. So, wow. Don't you love how posturing and fear and greed affect this market? And we've been talking about this for quite a while. But if you look in terms of what happens in economies, and when I talk about the economy, I'm talking about gross domestic product, GDP. And GDP is the single most determinant factor of a country's economic health and its citizenry's economic health. And the GDP, collectively called the economy, in any economy, I don't care if it's your city of La Mesa economy, the county of San Diego's economy, the state of California's economy, the United States economy, or a global economy, it has to do with consumer spending. 70% of almost every economy in this world is based upon consumer spending, which means that if the participants in an economy are not spending money, the economy is in trouble. So this is why the stock market and the economy, although not the same thing, are joined at the hip. And this is why we count on things like job numbers. This is why we look at things like job numbers. Because it's critical to our sort of open air indicators and the health of the economy. So we saw this week a number of things happen with the trade deal. And in light of you can blame it on the trade. U.S. equities jumped between gains and losses all week long. There was $1 trillion wiped off the table last week. And in this week, the Chinese people seem to be in a fighting mood. And Donald Trump seems to be in a fighting mood. That's nothing new. But of course, there was the Huawei story. Huawei is a very big Chinese technical innovation company, I guess is probably the best way you could put it. And what happened with Huawei was pretty interesting, where there was a massive blacklisting, if you will. It would be as if Samsung was blacklisted from parts to make phones. Or probably a better, Best Buy couldn't even buy phones or any electronics to sell. That's probably close to what it was like. So the Chinese people, firing shots across the bow. And once again, I've said this a number of times, the Chinese government, the Chinese politics, the Chinese economy is not strong enough to withstand a trade war with the U.S., which is just singing. You realize our economy, the reason I say we're singing is because our economy is singing. There's 1 million more jobs than there is people right now. And Donald Trump's proposed tariffs don't seem to be making a hitch in the giddy up. By the way, he did propose tariffs on the shoes made in China this week, and it didn't go over very well with the sneaker makers because Nike and Adidas and almost 200 footwear companies signed an open letter to the president calling plans for to tax consumer goods as much as 25% would be catastrophic for us consumers and for the American economy. It sounds like an agenda to me because they get cheap shoes and cheap labor. But what it points out to is there's other options for them. They don't have to make their shoes in China. They don't have to make their shoes in one place. Vietnam, by the way, is turning out as the leader in the manufacturing race as people are pulling away from China. In fact, the average Vietnamese worker makes $3,800 a year. The average Chinese worker makes $10,300 a year. And intellectual property is not ending up going out the back door in Vietnam. So that's, they've got a laissez-faire economic attitude. They've got, low wages. There's a lot of reason to think that there's going to be a shift from China, which is why a trade war with China hurts China a lot more than it hurts the U.S. So we'll figure that out. Here to talk about that, because part of what we have to see here with market volatility and why it's important to keep your money at risk is Christina Gustin with RKG Wealth Management and UBS. She joins us every Saturday here on San Diego Business Saturday on News Radio 600 Kogo. she is the smartest person I know in the game of investing. And she's particularly fond of working with millennials. And this is going to sound weird, but every single female I talk to that asks me money advice, I tell her, once you got your acorns gathered in the corner there, go see Christina Gustin because she knows what's going on. But there is something to be said, Christina, even in these times of economic uncertainty and the stock market's volatile and we got this China trade deal, you got to keep your money at risk overall, because had people just put their money under the mattress during times like this, they end up losing out on a lot of potential opportunity. Talk about how you handle that sort of volatility, because that's what you're here for.
Well, good morning. First of all, thanks for having me on,
well, thanks for coming.
And all those nice things that you said. I appreciate that. You're exactly right. I think that where we are right now is a definition of this term we use, geopolitical risk. And as you outlined, things continue to be really rocky with the, there's a lot of bluster going on right now between the U.S. and China. We think eventually, I think I've said before, that they're going to work it out. But in our UBS House View research report that we publish every week, this week they crunched the numbers on what would happen if they didn't work it out, and all the tariffs that we're threatening right now were in fact put into place. It would put almost a 1% reduction in the U.S. GDP, the gross domestic product that you were talking about earlier, which would translate to potentially a downside of 10 to 15% for U.S. equities. So, on the off chance, and I think that they're going to work it out, I think it's going to take a while and there's some pain in between here and there, but if the two countries were not able to find a resolution, it could be really bad. So I think the question is always, what do we do in the meantime? How do we get ready? And, how should my portfolio be positioned? So that's what we talk to our investors about.
Well, it's funny because you may love them, you may hate them, and when we sort of keep politics out of our business talk here on this show anyway, I can tell you, it seems like Donald Trump and his handlers know what they're doing. Look, I don't agree with a lot of what he says. At the same time, I got to admit the economy's singing along. We've got, as I said before, 1 million more jobs and we have people to fill them. And I think a piece of this coming out with respect to the U.S.-China trade war is all negotiative stance. It's posturing on both sides. I think if you guys know at UBS, the smartest guys around, those type of reports filter up to the White House. I mean, they've got a cadre of research there. I sort of think that Donald Trump would know what it would mean to his presidency if the equities markets drop by 10 to 15%, because I think you're right, because you wipe out 1% of the GDP, then you're back to the days of where we were in the last administration. And actually resetting a new paradigm shift in manufacturing. So that's a piece of it. But how do you explain that to someone who is, let's say, turning 64 years old this year, has another, in their mind, year and a half of working, looking at, some days they've got $50,000 or $80,000 losses in their portfolios? I mean, how do you mitigate that, Christina? How do you talk to that? And so talk our listeners off the fence, because there's a lot of people are not on the fence, on the cliff. How do you talk them away from that? Because I know you have this conversation often.
Back away from the cliff, no jumping out windows allowed. You have to, I know I sound like a broken record, you have to take a really long-term view. I saw a stat the other day that said something like, average annual returns on the stock market over the last 50 years is something like 9.8%. Yeah. So that's through the ups and downs, including reinvested dividends, which are basically magic for your portfolio. But for the investor that you just talked about, the bottom line is diversification. So you don't have all your money in the stock market. You're also going to own some fixed income. You're going to own some bonds. If you're one of my clients, you're probably going to own some municipal bonds, which are, if they're California municipal bonds and you're a California resident, they're double tax free and incredibly conservative in terms of risk. So we establish kind of a ballast or a core for our portfolios to help you kind of stabilize during times of volatility.
So with respect to this China trade deal, Is this one of the and you've been in this business for quite a while, and there's been events that have happened in our history that you just sort of know you got to buckle up. Is this something that we have to buckle up for? Because I think there's so much bad that could happen if they don't strike a deal that the administration, I'm going to go back to this again, probably already knows that, and they're probably more likely than unlikely, as you mentioned, to put a deal in place. Is this one of those events, though, that's so critical that you guys are, is it time to buckle up, or are we still in the wait and see category here?
That's a great question. We have a 30% expectation that it won't work out. Having said that, I mean, I've been kind of buckling up for the last year or so.
Sure.
It's been incredibly volatile, and buckle up doesn't mean go to cash and go to CDs, but it means look at the quality of your holdings, and is that stock that you own, do they have a healthy balance sheet that you think could ride out a major downturn if we get a significant correction or another recession? Look at everything in your portfolio and say, what is my expectation of how this thing can ride it out? So when I say buckle up, that's kind of what I mean. Look at the quality of what you own.
There you go. Smartest girl in investing, Christina Gustin, UBS Wealth Management, UBS Financial, RKG Wealth Management. You can find all of her information at kogo.com, keyword Sully, where you could also find San Diego Business Saturday. You can watch us on TV there too, You can check us out. Big Biz Show coming up this week also, bigbizshow.com, where me and Rusty Nails talk about business all day long. Some interesting and borderline disturbing news about us taxpayers coming up in just a second. It is San Diego Business Saturday. News Radio 600 Kogo.
What do you think the teacher's going to look like this year? Whoa! Oh!
News Radio 600 Kogo, San Diego Business Saturday. All the way from San Diego to L.A., to Santa Barbara, all the way up to Yuma. We're on the air. Thanks again to Christina Gustin from UBS Financial and RKG Wealth Management, breaking down this U.S.-China trade deal. Much more to come. By the way, you can catch me every morning with Ted and LaDonna on the Kogo Morning News. Also offering commentary several times a week over on KUSI, Good Morning San Diego, and then the nationally syndicated television program and radio program. Yep, we're in 110 million broadcast TV homes every day and about 150 radio stations across the country, also on iHeartRadio. Big Biz Show with Rusty Nails and I. Weekdays, you can go to bigbizshow.com. We're about to get to my good friend Matthew Moore. Matthew Moore is the CEO of a company called Interscope Hearing Technologies, and the reason I wanted to bring him on is because he's been a guest on Big Biz Show, but this is a really interesting story about the confluence of business and healthcare and things that are going on with you that you don't realize are going on with you potentially, and we wanted to bring that up. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit of a story I covered on Wednesday this week during the San Diego Morning News on News Radio 600 Kogo. Some pretty interesting and borderline disturbing news about U.S. taxpayers, according to a new IRS poll. So the overwhelming majority of taxpayers still say that there's no excuse to misstate or even misrepresent even a penny on their return. But there's been some slippage in that moral and legal stance of late. There's, according to a new information from the Internal Revenue Service, fewer Americans think it's unacceptable. Fewer Americans think it's unacceptable to cheat on their taxes. That means that more people think it's okay to cheat on their taxes. Newly released data for the fiscal year 2018, 85% of people said no amount of cheating was permissible. That's down from 88% the year before. And 10% of those polled said that a little bit of fudging was okay. That's up from 9% from 2017. But here's the interesting part. That number's been hovering around 4% since 2009. So suddenly, over twice the amount of people from previously say that it's okay to fudge on your taxes. 2,000 people polled, just a point of reference for you. Statistically speaking, when you poll 1,000 people in a demographically diverse area, that is statistically enough to determine what the masses think. So in this case, they polled 2,000 people, and they published it in the IRS's 2018 data book, which is an annual report on taxpayer attitudes and tax collection statistics. That came out earlier this week. But all is not lost. Even with the slightly slackening news and views from taxpayers, they're holding steady. We are holding steady on a question about the responsibility to pay taxes. In fact, 95% of us told the IRS that we mostly agree with the statement, it's every American's civic duty to pay taxes. So things are not as bad as you think. The other story I wanted to talk about is Uber. Kind of brought something up to the workplace that we had a discussion on with Rusty on Big Biz Show this week. But the question is, would you take a cut in pay to have less noise? And Uber, of course, just did their IPO last week. I don't know what they're, it's funny. I didn't see how they ended up the week, but I can give you an idea here in a minute. But Uber has recently announced a couple of new features in their app. If you're taking an Uber, and of course it's Uber Technologies and their stock symbol is UBER, and they're around $42 a share, something like that. They announced something called quiet mode, where the driver is instructed not to talk to you. No typical chit chat in the cars. So apparently Uber's internal research discovered that some people, that rhyme with Sully, will pay extra for a little peace and quiet. So if in other words, you can go in your app and you can, there's a couple things. Would you like the car warm? Would you like the car cool? Would you like to have them talk to you? That you can set all those things. Actually, truthfully, last time I took an Uber, which was last weekend when I was emceeing the Fiesta del Sol up in Solana Beach. I took an Uber because I knew parking would be just a pain. I saw the option for me to say, what's your conversation preferences? I skipped that one. But yeah, you can actually pay a little bit more to be in quiet mode. It begs to ask the question, though, if people are willing to pay extra for silence and privacy in their car rides, doesn't it seem logical that employees would be willing to accept lower salaries if their workplace didn't force them to work in a cafeteria-like environment that's noisy and intrusive, kind of like these open office spaces that many CEOs have been snookered into because they turn out to be not so great for productivity. So would employees accept lower salaries if their workplace didn't force them to work in this cafeteria-like environment? Turns out one survey says a lot of employees would be willing to work for less money, provided they could work within an environment that provides private areas as a default, not public areas, like a small little office, even a coat size or a coat closet size office. Problem here, unfortunately, is that, just as I mentioned with this open plan office, it's going to be hard to get CEOs to admit that they've been snookered because they put all this money into these open spaces. More and more you're seeing these sort of WeWork. And WeWork and Hub are great spaces, but when you're in an office environment where it's just it's an open forum, sometimes people are getting their work done. Not that I have an option here on radio and TV, but with Rusty Nails on the air with me, I would like some peace and quiet sometime. So I'll put that story up at kogo.com, keyword Sully, and also bigbizshow.com. Matthew Moore is the CEO of a company called Interscope Hearing Technologies. It is a publicly traded company, and they are in the business of manufacturing and distributing patented hearing aid technologies to the, get this, 48 million hearing impaired people in the U.S. He's not joined us here on News Radio 600 Kogo yet, but he's a frequent guest over on Big Biz Show. But I wanted to invite him in here just to not only talk about the business of what he's doing, but to talk about sort of this epidemic, because it's happening in the workplaces, it's happening in the schools, it's happening almost everywhere, and people aren't aware of it. Matt, thanks so much for swinging by this morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Good. Listen, so for your San Diego, LA audience, talk a little bit about the problem, because people don't realize how many folks this hearing problem affects, right? Isn't this staring down the barrel of 50 million people and many of them undiagnosed?
It is. And, with over 48 million, almost 50 million people in the United States suffering from hearing loss, only about 8 million people are currently seeking a treatment with a hearing device. That's over 40 million people suffering from hearing loss that is not getting the help that they need and deserve.
So would you go as far to say, Matt, that this is an epidemic? Because I'm looking at some graphics up on your website here. And by the way, if you're listening to us anywhere across the Southland, you can also go to kogo.com, keyword Sully, and watch the TV version of the show, because we tape it right out of the Jump Television studios where we do Big Biz Show. And Matt's joining us via Skype, so you can actually see Matt and hear him. But 12 million people around the world, or better, with hearing loss, 50 million in the U.S., 42 million untreated. This sounds like an epidemic to me.
It really is. I mean, it all comes down to awareness. People are not aware that they, are having trouble hearing. And that's what Interscope's mission is all about, is to bring awareness and bring this epidemic to the forefront, that a person actually, if a person has a hearing loss and is not getting treatment with a hearing device, they're 5 times more likely to have cognitive decline, which means that they can get dementia and Alzheimer's.
Well, so talk about that, because it's been documented there's a direct link to dementia and Alzheimer's if with untreated hearing, correct?
There is. And, that's the reason why, is that people need to really pay attention to hearing loss. And that if they find any differences or any trouble hearing, they need to get their hearing checked. And then ultimately, if they do have a hearing loss, they do need to get help sooner than later.
So you guys, Interscope, by the way, and you can go to INND.com, INND, N as in Nancy, N as in Nancy, D as in Delta.com, to check out everything they have there. And by the way, they are publicly traded under the stock symbol INND, which is where the website came from. But you guys are one of the first companies to sort of disrupt the hearing aid industry by not only lowering the cost, but you're giving a B2C approach, whereby normally I would have to go only to an audiologist and buy through an audiologist. Now, of course, you still have to go to an audiologist to get fitted and stuff, but you've sort of changed the world here. Talk about what you guys are doing and how you're deploying it, because I'm seeing things by looking at your press releases where big names like Walmart and such like that are being mentioned. Talk about that.
Yeah, basically, we're offering manufacturer direct pricing directly to the consumer. We're bypassing the middleman of sorts and able to offer the same premium level of technology 50 to 75% cheaper than if you went to a local audiologist. You can buy our devices on Walmart.com, Kmart.com, Sears.com.
Wow.
And we're adding more on a weekly basis right now. So it's all about offering premium, affordable, accessible hearing devices to the 42 plus million people in America that, again, need and deserve better hearing.
Well, I mean, if you're thinking that there's only about 8 million people in the U.S. that wear hearing aids, and there's 40 million that just don't know about it, I think a big piece of this is to let people know. That's one of the reasons we wanted to have you here on News Radio 600 Kogo on San Diego Business Saturday. Again, his name is Matt Moore. He's the CEO of Interscope Hearing Technologies. If you want more information, you can go to INND.com. And of course, you just mentioned several websites, Kmart.com, Walmart.com, Sears.com. If they go to those websites, Matt, is it just, do they type in hearing aids and yours is a brand that'll show up, or do they need to type in Interscope Hearing Technologies, or how do they find you if they go to those websites?
Really, if you just type in hearing aids in those in Walmart, Sears, Kmart, you'll come up with our products as being a top seller on those platforms. Talk
about our military men and women serving our country overseas and underway, and God bless every one of them that are deployed, not deployed, retired, or active. Whereby you've got the government spending $3 billion a year on tinnitus because of the claims paid out to our veterans. You guys have a technology there as well, don't you?
Yeah. Basically, we're in a 510K FDA medical clearance study right now on a treatment for tinnitus. And we're looking to have that cleared by the fourth quarter of this year. And we'll be the first and only FDA cleared treatment for tinnitus. The VA spends over $3 billion a year in disability claims alone, with about 1 million people suffering from tinnitus just in the VA. And it's said about 40 million people in the United States suffer from tinnitus. It's a big issue.
Matt, awesome stuff. We're going to send as many people as we can there. Matthew Moore, CEO, Interscope Hearing Technologies, INND.com. San Diego Business Saturday is on the air, News Radio 600 Kogo, but here we got news and traffic. See you in a sec. Hey, News Radio 600 Kogo. Happy Saturday to you, and it's a beautiful one. It's been a while. San Diego Business Saturday is on the air. Thanks again to Steve J.J. Wiseman, the scam man, scamicide.com, also Christina Gustin, wealth advisor for UBS. And look who I have in studio with us, Bob Babbitt, good friend. Not only good friend, but I will tell you, an icon in San Diego with respect to not only philanthropy, but business. Everyone here knows that I am passionate about Challenge Athletes Foundation, and we will definitely get to CAF in part of this interview. But also, Bob and I met when I was a taco shy of 300 pounds.
Yes, you were.
And this is, I'm going to call this in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. How big?
And I started getting in shape, and I realized that you can't live your life like, what's the Tommy Boy line, fat and stupid your whole life, or was it Animal House? But I started this thing called Club Clydesdale.
You did.
And somehow you and I.
How big are you?
You saw me at a race or something.
Yes.
And you came up, you said you should make some T-shirts, and you came up with the tagline for the front of the T-shirt that said, How big are you?
Yes. How big are you? It was perfect.
Do that again, it would probably sell.
It would sell huge. They do have Clydesdale National Championships now.
I forget what it was. Was it if you're over 250 pounds or 225 pounds or something like that?
Yeah, it couldn't be 200. 200 was too light, but 250 was good.
Right. So if you're 250, you don't want to be competing with a guy that's your size for the same sort of deal.
Yeah.
Talk about your beginnings here in San Diego, because everyone knows about CAF now, or at least anybody who talks to me, but also you had Competitor Magazine, which turned into Competitor Group, which turned into almost every ultra sport magazine that there was here, right here in sunny San Diego. Talk about the beginning.
Well, the beginning really was when I first did Ironman in 1980, it was one of those things that there was only 108 of us. And the year before, there was 15.
That's when you used to celebrate at Diego's in Pacific Beach.
Absolutely.
Right? Which most people don't even know existed.
And Ironman now, people equate it with the big island of Hawaii. This was on Oahu. There was no aid stations. No roads were blocked off. You were on your own. You had your own crew. I had a...
Didn't you guys used to have like backpacks and stuff on your bikes?
I did. I had a pannier sleeping bag and tent on my $75 police auction bike, which I bought, had been in a fire, and the whole back end was charred. But I had pannier sleeping bag and tent on the bike because I thought you swam 2.4, rode 56, camped out, rode back the next day, and did the marathon, which makes a hell of a lot more sense, to be honest. And when I finished that race, and it was one of those things, you're right. Oh, you'll love this, Sully. They had scales on the course throughout the race
to weigh you or your
to weigh you. Right?
To weigh you.
If you lost 5% of your body weight, they yanked you out of the race, right? Where they came up with the science, this is 1980.
Well, because there was no technical science really for kinesiology in 1980, right?
And of course, who knows what to eat for this thing? So I'm eating Hawaiian sweetbread and drinking Gatorade. And I come off the bike.
You're just snacking along the way.
First, I come off the bike, and my crew is like, "Hey, how about a massage?" So I laid down for a 45-minute massage between the bike and the run.
45 minutes.
Oh yeah, easily. Sure. Yeah, they had a boom box and a bit. But then they weighed you, and then I started running, and I'm waddling through Waikiki eating Hawaiian sweetbread and Gatorade, and then I get to about mile 5 and
of 26,
and they go to weigh me again, and I can hear the guy in the walkie-talkie. He's like, "Hey, can you give me that again? This guy's gained 4 pounds. You can't gain weight doing this thing."
Is that where you came up with Competitor Magazine?
No.
Was that the first one?
Yeah. Well, originally it was. So we left when I finished that race. I knew this sport was special. I knew this sport changed lives because I was totally different.
Even
though
there was only 30 guys there.
There was 108 guys that year, but still, it had grown from 15 the year before to 108.
Oh, I see.
Right, and then Wide World of Sports covered it in 1980, and then things were growing. So I left teaching and started working for a magazine called Running News, and then it became Running and Triathlon News as this new sport was growing. I became LA editor, convinced the art teacher from the school I was at, Lois Schwartz, to leave teaching and come be the photographer because this sport was going to be huge. And then in '87. The magazine closed. Speaking of scams, the guy bought the company, Running Triathlon News, closed it, right? Collected all the money owed and disappeared.
And didn't put the advertising out or anything else like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So anyways, myself and Lois were out of a job. And I went and met with 2 publishers who had cycling magazines, Southwest Cycling and California Bicyclist. Wow. And I said to both of them, if we did a magazine covering running, triathlon, and cycling, it'd be really popular. Their exact words, both of them. Triathlon's a fad. It'll be gone in 5 years. This is 1987.
Same guy who said the mouse would be a fad.
Exactly.
Right.
And we'll never put a skinny runner on the cover of our magazine. I'm like, oh, crap. I come back, and some friends, including Larry White, who you know very well, gave us a check for $17,000 and said, start your own magazine. And we were in 200 square feet in a guy's garage under 20,000 pounds of bike racks, paying $200 a month.
And what year was this?
1987. June of '87 was the first issue of Competitor Magazine. Lois and I didn't pay ourselves for a year and a half. We had no idea that 95%.
How did you guys survive back then? There wasn't a gig economy back then, Bob.
No.
There wasn't something where you could drive Uber at night to eat. How did you guys survive?
I lived on savings. I slept on friends' floors, and it was one of those things where even though I didn't know that 95% of all magazines go out of business in the first year, ignorance is bliss. We believed in what we were doing. We believed in the storytelling. And the other thing we had overcome, everybody thought a free magazine was a penny saver. It was a piece of crap that just had coupons in it.
That's right.
And we had to change the perception. If I wanted to get national ads, we had to change that perception. And
So you had to have editorial, right?
real editorial
Yeah, right.
and real photography. And then what we had to do was, my advertising, what I sent out to the ad agencies was, listen, ABC, CBS, NBC, their business model is we're free and we create great content and we sell advertising based on the numbers of people who watch. That's my business philosophy. ESPN is they're doing subscription. It's a different business model. They're doing subscription. They're doing great content. So is one better than the other? In my mind, it wasn't.
Right.
So that's how we sort of overcame that. Next thing you know, we had Gatorade, we had Nike, we had all these national clients.
So talk about
Yes.
that though, because
Yeah.
by the way, Bob Babbitt joins us here. He's one of the founders of the Challenge Athletes Foundation. He also started Competitor Magazine here in San Diego. It's turned out to be a competitor group. But how did you convince your first advertiser? Because I understand getting a writer to come in and get some free editorial.
Right.
I understand talking Lois into come and taking photographs, and you have this idea. And the business model was obviously and still is works. But how did you get that? How'd you hook that first guy?
You know what? What really mattered was I remember calling Nike. Nike had been an advertiser with Running and Triathlon News. And I called the agency up, and Wyden and Kennedy, and said, listen, I can't even show you my new magazine. It's not out
Yeah, you
yet.
had a piece of paper and a masthead, right?
But I would be honored to have you on the back cover like you've been for Running and Triathlon News. And they signed a 3-year contract, sight unseen.
Wow.
I will always be loyal because...
Did you have to give it away at all? Or did you,
No. No. People paid. But the other thing we did was I felt what people wanted most was they wanted to know where the events were. The events, to me, were a piece of editorial.
Right, because they didn't have the internet. You could find your local 5K,
Exactly.
10K, or triathlon every week.
So that was a piece of editorial, and we decided we'd make our prices for advertising in terms of events with like 1/3 the price of everything else.
Sure.
Because when those events are in, that's the place everybody's going. Everybody's picking it up. The other thing that was really important to me was everybody who was distributing free magazine was, if you're a cycling magazine, you're in a bike shop. If you're a running magazine, you're a running store. My philosophy was, if I'm going to a running store to pick up my magazine, how often am I going to a running store? Once every 3-4 months.
Right.
So
good point.
Ralph Rubio's.
So Rubio's.
California's Fittest Food, California's Fittest Magazine, Jamba Juice.
By the way,
eat.
it used to be publicly traded on the stock symbol RUBO, by the way.
Yes.
Rubio's was a publicly traded company for a long time. People don't know that.
But Ralph was a good friend, and he was kind enough that we ended up in 140 Rubios. We're going through like 15,000 copies. Because think about it. The average person is thinking, okay, I'm 20 pounds overweight. I'm going to change my life. And they're not hiring a trainer.
Yeah,
they're not hiring a nutritionist.
With a bag of fried fish,
exactly.
Fish tacos.
So the way they start, they decide, okay, I'm not going to Burger King today and have a Whopper. I'm going to go to Jamba Juice and have a smoothie. And then they get in there, and then they see this thing called Competitor.
That's right.
And then they see a thing called a 5K. And
you know, yogurt shops too. I remember at the time where everywhere that was sort of thought to be some fitness
something
food,
related,
yogurt, smoothies, fish tacos. You weren't in the Jack in the Box.
No.
You weren't in the McDonald's.
We were in, and Rubio's had created their healthy Health Mex menu.
Right.
It was perfect. And our tagline on the racks was California's Fittest Food, California's Fittest Magazine. And between Jamba Juice and Rubio's, it was easy to tell people where to find us.
Sure.
We were the only publication in there, and it was good for everybody. We would put training schedules on our website and link to Rubio's, and had people training to do races. It was great.
What was your highest circulation? And if I'm not mistaken, just
500,000.
Just edification. Circulation is how many magazines you print every run. You were monthly, right?
We were monthly, and we had 1 point. Well, because we went from Southern, we did California, competitor SoCal, competitor NorCal, competitor Texas, competitor Northwest, and competitor Southeast. And then those were our 5, and eventually we had competitor Chicago, New York, and then 500,000 circulation.
How many pages was that first magazine?
Oh, first magazine was, I think, 40. Because that was the minimum.
40 pages.
Yeah, but that was the cheapest way to do it back then.
And do you remember what it cost you to print that thing back then? Way back.
You know what's so funny? Because we got the check for $17,000 start the magazine. My first print bill was $20. No, I was $3,000 in the hole from the very beginning.
So $20,000 to print the magazine.
Yes.
At the very end, the $500,000. Were you even involved at that point where you knew what those printing costs were? It's just interesting to see how your OpEx went up, operating expenses went up,
it went
as
crazy.
well as the revenue went up.
Yeah.
At some point there, I know there's an exit here.
Yes.
But talk about when it went from Competitor Magazine to Competitor Group, because there was other magazines involved along the way.
Well, it wasn't just magazine. So what we did is we built Competitor to a point where we had the 5 magazines, had competitor radio, had my competitor endurance awards, and then I'd created a series called the Muddy Buddy Ride and Run series.
Right.
And Muddy Buddy was just this silly event I'd been doing in Penasquitas Canyon, and it was really a business decision because the president of Brooks Shoes, we're trying to sell them advertising. We were belly up, trying to convince Bruce Pettit, the president of Brooks Shoes, to buy advertising. And his exact words were, guys, I can't afford to compete with Nike and Adidas and Reebok in terms of advertising. But if you had a cool event, I've got promotional dollars. So that became, okay, I've got this Muddy Buddy. I took this ride and tie, 2 people and cruiser bikes with this off-road, people eating Spam and throwing the bikes wherever they wanted, and made it a formalized event where it was 2 people on a mountain bike, and you had obstacles and you had mud pits, and we grew that to 7 events. And that really led to us selling the company.
So we're gonna talk about the exit here at Happen. Also talk about Challenge Athletes Foundation coming up here, because Challenge Athletes Foundation is really what your passion is here. And mine is too. And I can tell you, in the meantime, if you want to go to challengedathletes.org, you can check that out. In the meantime, though, Bob Babbitt, entrepreneur, a San Diego CEO, San Diego icon. More from him on San Diego Business Saturday on News Radio 600 KOGO. But first, here's some traffic. Hey there, News Radio 600 KOGO, San Diego Business Saturday. I'm Sully. So great to have you along today. We're talking to Bob Babbitt, one of the co-founders of Challenged Athletes Foundation, also the founder of, or the co-founder of, Competitor Magazine and Competitor Group, the Ride and Tie, the Muddy Buddy, all of which we've all gotten involved in here. Now, is Competitor Magazine still around? I don't see it. I haven't been to a Jamba Juice forever.
No. Ironman bought, Competitor was converted into a running magazine, which I thought was a huge mistake a number of years ago. And that's one of the reasons I ended up leaving in 2000. We sold in 2008 and it became the Competitor Group.
Now, was it sold to private equity?
It was.
Okay, so let me explain that to folks, because private equity is a way that business owners can exit without completely exiting oftentimes, because oftentimes a private equity group will come in and take a big position, equity position from the founders, offering an exit, usually either in cash or stock. And oftentimes they'll keep you on for a little bit on a salary to help sort of transition in. Right. Oftentimes the story is they don't listen to the old management and they do their own thing, right? I mean, isn't that the rub with private equity?
Absolutely. But private equity is they buy to sell, right? Exactly. And you know it's a short run. So the whole idea with Falconhead is, and I had a mentor named Greg Rourke who had been president of Danskin Company. He said, Bob, listen, one, people are going to want to get your books to take a look at them, and they're fishing. Right?
Sure. So, and you're privately held, by the way, and that's one of the things about a privately held company. You're not required to pull the covers down like a publicly traded company is.
Right, exactly.
So in other words, this isn't about full disclosure to your shareholders. Right. This is about somebody having a perception about your business, valuing the business, which is sort of altruistic anyway.
Absolutely.
And then and you are keeping cards close to the vest here, correct?
Well, and the main thing is I knew I wouldn't keep cards close to the vest, so I asked Greg if he would help me out, and he would assess. Put somebody between you. Right. So he basically would call me every time someone would call me. I took him to Greg, and he would come back and go, "Big hat, no cattle." Right, was his exact words, right? Sure. Everyone. And finally, when Falconhead approached, he said, "Big hat, big herd." Yeah. And these are the right guys, and we ended up doing a deal. So what they did is they bought Competitor Magazine. They bought my, Muddy Buddy, which was really the main reason I sold. I sold because we had 7 Muddy Buddies, and every time we created a new Muddy Buddy, it was going to cost us $100,000 to go into a market and create this new event.
And you had to break even as fast as you could on those things.
And we didn't have the funding. We would have had to go out and take big bank loans, put our homes up. I was in my 50s. Lois was in her 60s. That was one option. Another option was go get a partner who would probably screw us, or sell. Yeah. And we decided on sell. And sell was still the greatest move I ever made, because what Greg told me is, Bob, understand, no one buys you because they believe in you. They buy you because they believe in themselves, and they can take this to another level, and you're just an impediment that's in their way. Once you understand that and don't listen to their, we believe in you, just want to fund your vision. Once you understand that, you understand that it's all about you got your dollars and get the heck out of the way, and it's their ball now.
I talk to publicly traded companies as a consultant. I do a lot of keynotes as a negotiator. And I will tell you, there's one adage I have, and I'm sure, and you lived right through it. People are not in the business of buying stock; they're in the business of selling stock.
Right.
Which
true.
people don't really understand on that.
That's a great point.
Is that they really are. With respect to you, and this is one of the things, I've known you for a long, long time, and I've interviewed you probably 100 times over the years, but we've been friends. One of the things that was most notable about your journey was you didn't do this for the money. You didn't think in terms of, you had to make a living.
Right.
But this is about passion first.
Absolutely.
To you, money's always been just a number.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, even when you exited, it was just a number. Your life didn't really change.
No.
You didn't let your life change, what I thought was interesting.
I still got my Dodge van.
What
with all my stuff in it.
Yeah, and I talk about that all the time, and which brings us to our next story, because the van, your Dodge van, maybe not that particular Dodge van, but the van is part of the Challenged Athletes Foundation story. And CAF, of course, is an unbelievable organization. I talk about CAF nonstop. We've been able to because of the Kogo listeners, because of our viewers at Big Biz Show, because of KUSI viewers. I think I'm up to almost 150,000 in raising money. Yeah. That's nothing compared to what you guys have done. And all the other guys here in San Diego, gals across the country, raising money for CAF. Talk about CAF and the genesis of that.
Well, the genesis really goes back to, you think about it, Competitor Magazine. There was a guy named Jim McLaren who was a football player at Yale in 1985. He was taking acting classes in New York, gets hit by a bus while he's on his motorcycle, thrown 90 feet in the air, dead on arrival. He lives but loses his lower left leg. And
so he was DOA, but he survived.
He was DOA. They chalked his body on the ground, and then Jimmy lost his lower left leg and reinvented himself as an endurance athlete and ran a 3:16 marathon with basically a walking leg, and then went 10:42 at the Ironman World Championship in Kona, which is where I met him.
A walking leg, by the way, is what we used to see. It was a flesh tone colored leg.
Captain Hook. Think Captain Hook, right, and add some paint.
And what year was this?
Well, Jimmy was first injured in 85, and then when he first came out of Ironman, 89, 90, 91
So
era.
this is how it used to be.
Absolutely.
You didn't see running blades.
No,
You didn't
exist.
see adaptive chairs or even adaptive skiing. This was basically getting from point A to point B.
This was really prehistoric. The Earth was still cooling at this point when it came to athlete. So anyway, so we met Jimmy, and Jimmy's traveling the world. He's this endurance legend. Everybody knows him. In 93, he was racing in Mission Viejo, and on his bike, a van goes through a closed intersection, hits the back of his bike, propels him headfirst into a pole. A guy who's already an amputee becomes a quadriplegic, which was the most horrific thing we'd ever heard. So myself, Jeffrey Esikow, and Rick Kozlowski, and you think about it, Koz was an event producer, Jeffrey's a financial guy, I'm a marketing guy. The three of us came together and said, let's put on an event, and the whole idea is we want to raise $25,000 to buy Jimmy a van that will give him independence.
Sure.
Hand control van. That was it. So we put on a little event at La Jolla Cove in 94. We raised 49, thought our job was done. 3 amputee women came to us and told us, it's great we did for Jimmy, but did you know if you get injured, your health insurance will cover a walking around leg and everyday wheelchair, but anything to do with sport is considered a luxury
Which
item.
is still the price today. If you lose a limb because you are a veteran of a foreign war or a motorcycle accident victim or even a birth defect or cancer, you lose or lose anything, they'll give you a walking leg if you're insured.
Right.
But it's still to this day, sports are a luxury.
Luxury.
Physical
not covered.
activity is a luxury.
Yeah. It's
in the mind of the insurance company.
They don't understand what it makes you a better parent. It makes you a better employee. It makes you better at everything you do. Just the endorphins that come from exercise.
Well, it's interesting because if you go to challengedathletes.org, and we'll talk about how you can get involved, but 4 out of 5 people with physical challenges who have received a CAF grant report increased activity level, more happiness, more confidence, more emotional satisfaction.
No question.
And that's been the story all along here.
Yep.
How did it go from Jim to a few female amputees to where you are now? Because what are we at our 20s?
$100 million, 25 years, 23,000 grants, 40 this last year, 48 states, 40 countries.
You've given away $100 million.
$100 million. And now this year,
$10 of a billion.
Yeah,
I think we need to start talking.
And I think this year it'll be in over 100 sports. I think we're like this in 2019, 103, 105 sports. Who knew there was 105 sports out there?
What's interesting is the studio that we broadcast out of here for News Radio 600 Kogo, San Diego Business Saturday. We're 2 doors down from one of the biggest prosthetic athletic
Peter Harsh. I was just in there right now. I was right before I came here. I was over at Peter's place, and he's, you've got a young model who lost both legs to toxic shock syndrome from a tampon. Lost both legs.
Wow.
And she's going to be running New York City Marathon. And
when you say running, these blades, what do these things cost? I don't think people realize what they cost.
About $15K a piece because it's totally fitted to you. You can't you can't just go to the store and buy a running leg. These have to be made specifically for your body.
I know our very own Bill Walton here in San Diego is one of your national spokespeople, if he's not the national spokesperson, and he has always said no challenge is too great with the right support. That's why the goal for Challenged Athletes Foundation is to support physically challenged people with the tools they need to do sports. Talk about some of the sports, because I was just last year part of the adaptive surfing,
right?
And of course the ride down the coast from San Francisco to San Diego, which Kogo listeners have walked into the studio and handed checks for. Talk about some of the sports you guys help.
So what you would just love is I'm looking at the list, and our fourth highest funded sport is beep baseball.
What's beep baseball?
Beep baseball is for visually impaired, right? So we had a woman named Kalari Gertley from Chicago, a mother of 3, right? When she was 6 years old, she had a brain bleed and ended up losing her vision. Okay. Age of 6. So one day she's fine. The next day she can't see. So she became very aggressive, beating up her friends, her relatives, kids at school.
Just a brain injury, right?
Finds beep baseball, which is baseball for the brain. And the way it works, Sully, imagine you're wearing eye shades. You're on a baseball field. There's a beep in the ball. Right, so when you're batting,
so as it's getting closer, it's getting louder?
Yes.
No kidding.
And you have a pitcher and catcher who are from your team. So I just took this sport. We went to the MLB Network and had Harold Reynolds and Carlos Pena in the eye shades playing with the New Jersey Jets beep baseball team and Kalari, who we surprised with her grant. So imagine a tackling dummy down the first baseline, a tackling dummy down the third baseline.
Sure.
You're batting with eye shades on. There's 6 people in the field, and they all have eye shades on. There's 2 people out in the field who are directing the people who are totally
So they're
visual.
verbally directing.
Right.
Go right, go left, go run.
And the people who are pitching and catching, underhand, right, are people on your team. So they're saying ball as he's pitching. So you hit the ball, and you're running. And so as soon as you hit the ball, they activate the sound in either the first base dummy or the third base dummy, and you run to that. If
you're running towards the sound.
Yes. If you get there before someone picks up the ball, it's a run. If the ball gets picked up, it's an out. And they did a 5-minute feature, and Harold Reynolds was like, "This was the most amazing thing I've ever been part of." Being in the field and not knowing if a line drive is coming at your face,
sure,
and just sort of throwing your body in front of the sound of this ball. Right. It's great. And the balls cost $35 a piece, and 6 hits, and the thing's gone. You'll love this, Sully. If you catch a ball on a fly, you're immediately in the Hall of Fame. Do not pass go.
That's how it has to work.
5 people in history.
Bob Babbitt joins us here. He's one of the founders of the Challenged Athletes Foundation. If you want to learn about this and more, and of course, every year I get involved with Challenged Athletes Foundation for the $1 Million Challenge, where we raise money right here on the air, and we try to ride our bikes from San Francisco to San Diego, about 700 miles in 7 days. You can go to challengedathlete.org. ChallengeAthletes.org. We'll have this website up at the Kogo.com keyword Sully site. Also, if you're watching us on the TV version, which can be found at Kogo.com keyword Sully, you can see it there. Bob, always a pleasure, man. I swear, I could do 2 hours with you. You got 10 seconds to promote Babbittville. Talk about Babbittville real fast.
Babbittville, man. Check out all of our new YouTube interviews. Actually, we're interviewing Ben Hoffman tonight. That'll be up tomorrow.
All right, very good. Bob Babbitt, thanks so much, pal. It is San Diego Business Saturday. I'm Sully, News Radio 600 Kogo. Be sure to catch me every week. Wednesdays at 8:10 over with Ted and LaDonna here in the morning, and then on KUSI television. Also, Big Biz Show, bigbizshow.com with myself and Russ T. Nails. Until next week, San Diego Business Saturday is on the air. News Radio 600 Kogo.